The strikes that stole Christmas as a week of walkouts gets underway. Railways, airports and post offices are all affected. Now some want new rules to make it tougher to exercise the right to strike.
This is about them fighting for the future of their industry, of our industry and of the great British Post Office.
Also this lunchtime, finally safe. The girl whose tweets from East Aleppo gained a worldwide following is evacuated from her home. All our home nations fined by FIFA for displaying poppies on the pitch. And Harry's emotional reunion in Lesotho with the orphan he first met 15 years ago.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Charlene White.
Good afternoon. The Prime Minister's spokesperson laid into the unions this lunchtime, accusing them of shared contempt that's causing untold misery for hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of post offices are closed as staff walkouts over job cuts. Strikes at Southern Rail have caused further hold-ups on the rail, while airline passengers now face delays with strikes planned at 18 UK airports. Our political correspondent Paul Brand reports on the wave of discontent that doesn't show signs of stopping.
Whether it's by train, by air or by post, getting someone or something to a destination this week may prove difficult as the Christmas rush is significantly slowed by strikes. Outside the business department this morning, this Santa was in no hurry to deliver his parcels, all part of a picket by post office staff walking out this week over pensions and closures.
This is about them fighting for the future of their industry, of our industry and of the great British Post Office.
Though at branches today, managers insisted there was little disruption.
It's business as usual for the Royal Mail. There's a few hundred post offices out of 11,500 nationally that are affected. But in the vast majority of the network, I think about 97% of it, it's business as usual. In fact, we're open longer to help people get their work done this week.
But in total, 3,500 post office staff are due to walk out, joining a string of strikes this week. 1,500 baggage handlers and other staff will strike at 18 airports on Friday and Saturday. 300,000 passengers will be affected on Southern Rail as staff strike again today and tomorrow. And British Airways cabin crew could walk out on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, while Virgin Atlantic pilots are threatening to work to rule on Friday. The industrial action's over different issues, but some are calling for one solution. This Conservative MP among several sparking a row over tightening strike laws.
I completely accept and understand people's right to strike if they're being treated unfairly or oppressed, but that right must be balanced with the right of ordinary people to get to work and to see their loved ones, particularly at a time like Christmas.
I think the last thing that's needed is an emergency law to make exercising that fundamental British liberty of a right to strike even harder when we know that Britain has one of the toughest frameworks of law anywhere.
But more disagreement won't help customers who need some kind of consensus to save their Christmas. Paul Brandt, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, our business editor Joel Hills has joined us in the studio. Joel, people seem to be thinking back to the winter of discontent in the late 70s. But how does it compare this week?
There is no comparison. I mean, if you think about how many days we've lost to strike action in Britain in this year alone, I mean, it is measured in a couple of 100,000. I mean, you could measure it in the millions back in the 70s and 80s. So there is no comparison, even if politically some people might be motivated to suggest there is one. I mean, I think also the other thing I'd say about these strikes and the level is they may not end up causing that much disruption. I mean, the post office network, most of it is open. Crown post offices are closed. There is a level of disruption there. Royal Mail workers, postmen and women, are delivering Christmas cards and parcels as normal. And even British Airways this lunchtime has issued a statement making absolutely clear that it plans to run a full schedule on Christmas Day and Boxing Day despite the strike action announced by Unite. They have contingency plans in place people who can step into the breach, they will be able to operate a full service. So there may not be the disruption that perhaps people fear.
Yeah, OK. Well, Joel, thanks very much. Well, let's go back to our political correspondent, Paul Brown, who's in Westminster. And Paul, some are talking about changing the rules over when strikes can take place. Will the Prime Minister act on that?
Well, the Prime Minister's spokesman is saying today that nothing is off the table and that what all the unions involved in these individual strikes share in common is a contempt for ordinary people going about their daily business. But while the unions may be up for a fight, I think really the Prime Minister is sort of ducking and weaving in response here. She does not want to particularly land a hard blow in response. And as Joel alluded to there, you know, this isn't the 70s or the 80s. We're not seeing the same appetite from Theresa May for a standoff with the unions that we saw, for example, under Margaret Thatcher. And in fact, it's not long since David Cameron's government had to water down tougher strike laws, rowing back on certain measures. So really, I think the priority today for the government is to resolve all of these separate strikes rather than to inflame them.
Paul, thanks very much. Well, for full details on all the strikes over the Christmas period, do head to our website at itv.com/news. Dozens of buses full of evacuees have left eastern Aleppo since the early hours as rescue teams work around the clock to get civilians out. Among those who've managed to escape safely are 47 orphans, as well as Bana Alabaj, the 7-year-old who has been famously tweeting about living through Syria's civil war. Paul Davis has this report.
There were times, many times, when it seemed this moment would never happen. But finally, after so many false dawns, these citizens of East Aleppo are out of the battleground city that was their home, but was also their prison for so many months. Arriving in a convoy of buses in the countryside where they'll be safe, for now at least. It's being reported that 4,500 civilians have been evacuated from Aleppo since midnight, including this minibus packed with 50 children from an orphanage whose condition was causing extreme concern. The UN say some are injured, most dehydrated, and all traumatised. Among those reaching safety, a familiar face. 7-year-old Bana Alaved, whose video and tweeted thoughts brought the appalling world of a city under siege to millions of people worldwide.
Morning from Aleppo, we are still alive. No word hear that.
I don't want to hear that, she said, as the bombs and shells fell. Her messages to the outside world brought the horror home as few other things could. Today, Bana was still telling the world how the children of Aleppo had suffered. Everywhere there was bombing, she said. Her mother, Fatima's overwhelming emotion was relief.
When we get out, we had a lot of suffering because we stayed almost 24 hours in bus without water and food and anything. We stayed like a prisoner.
They have left their homes and just about everything else behind. Tonight, at least, they hope there'll be no shells or bombs. Paul Davis, ITV News.
A judge says a 101-year-old paedophile is unlikely to ever leave prison after sentencing him to 13 years in jail. Ralph Clark is thought to be the oldest person in British history to be convicted, charged with a catalogue of offences against 3 children in the 70s and 80s. Juries heard him describe how he was immune to feelings, and the same judge said he showed no remorse. And a man's admitted to the double murder of a couple outside Matalan in Cardiff city centre. 20-year-old Andrew Saunders was arrested the day he stabbed Zoe Morgan and Lee Simmons on a busy street in September. He'll be sentenced in the new year. The Football Association has been fined more than £35,000 by FIFA for wearing poppies during the World Cup qualifier against Scotland. There have also been fines for the Scots, the Welsh and Northern Ireland. Our sports correspondent Ian Payne is here to talk us through this. So tell us more about these fines.
OK, this refers back to various World Cup qualifiers in early November. England were playing Scotland at Wembley, and despite reservations from FIFA, both nations decided to wear poppies, but on black armbands. Additionally, there were floral tributes around the ground and poppies were sold through the crowd. Now, FIFA have reiterated they feel the poppy is a political symbol and therefore not allowable. As one official said today, there is only room for sport and nothing else. So the English FA have been fined around 35,000 and the Scottish FA, as the visiting team, slightly less, 15,000. Meanwhile, Wales have also been fined £15,000, even though they did wear black armbands with no poppy on them for their match against Serbia. There were tributes elsewhere in the ground, though. That's why they've made that ruling. And Northern Ireland have also been fined £11,000 for the same thing. And the Republic of Ireland have been fined around £4,000 for displaying a symbol referring to the Easter Rising on their shirts during one of their matches.
But have there been any response at all from any of the authorities?
There's been nothing official so far. The Football Association in England say they're considering all their options. They're obviously opening an appeal perhaps later on today, but whether that happens, we'll just have to see. Wales have told me that they will be discussing it this afternoon. So the recourse to action is really an appeal, but would they want to appeal against what is basically a slap on the wrist? Because if FIFA had really meant business, they could have actually deducted them points.
OK, Ian, thanks very much. Still to come, a woman of many marriages.
Lie closer, my dear.
After 99 years and 9 marriages, the world bids a fond farewell to Zsa Zsa Gabor. And friends reunited. Prince Harry and the orphan he supported for more than a decade. But first, a group of MPs are calling on the government to do more to tackle what they call the UK's unacceptable suicide rate. According to the latest figures, 6,188 people took their own lives in the UK last year. That's a rise of nearly 600 deaths in 5 years, when there were 5,612 suicides. Well, we're joined from Westminster by the chair of the Commons Health Committee, Sarah Wollaston, who released today's report. And with me in the studio is Johnny Benjamin, who tried to take his own life back in 2008. Thank you both for joining me. Sarah, I'm going to start with you, first of all. You know, it is the biggest killer of men under the age of 49, and in women it's its highest level for a decade. Why do you think we're seeing such numbers?
Well, we know that whenever there's an economic downturn, a recession, that this is linked to higher rates of suicide. But there are many factors behind higher suicide rates. And what we need to do is not to take a blaming approach, but to look very carefully at every opportunity we have to step in and save lives. Because unfortunately, the other thing we know is that the numbers that you've referred to are probably underestimates, because we're under-recording the true level.
Yeah.
And that's letting down future families who could be so tragically affected, because it means that we're not taking every opportunity to step in and bring this down. And we know what works. It's about implementing the strategy and taking an approach that says that suicide is preventable. We just need to make sure that we're using every opportunity to do so.
Of course. I mean, do you think that there's a failure along the line in any way in terms of our mental health services?
Well, we know that around a third of people who take their own lives are not in contact with health services in the year before their death. About a third are in contact with their GP, and about a third are in contact with specialist services. And what we need to do is look at each of those groups and say, where are the opportunities for us to step in and offer support? And yes, of course, there is an issue with the workforce, and we could always do with more funding for mental health. But as I say, the factors behind this are very complex, and it's about looking at every single opportunity we have to bring this down.
Sarah, I'm going to bring Johnny into this conversation here, because he's been nodding quite profusely during my chat with you. I mean, Johnny, our viewers may well remember you because somebody stepped in to help stop you jumping off a bridge back in 2008, and then you searched and managed to find that person. Do you think that there's a failure where mental health services are concerned?
A massive failure is a massive failure. In 2012, the government promised this equality, this parity of esteem between physical health and mental health, and that's not been delivered. I'm sorry, it's not been delivered. There's no maximum waiting times for mental health treatment. In some parts of this country, people are waiting 3 years for mental health treatment. So, of course, people are going to take their lives in that time. How can you expect people that are really unwell with mental health issues to carry on and just live with nothing, with no support whatsoever?
I mean, was anyone sort of there for you before you reached that point? Were there any sort of services available for you to use that perhaps you hadn't tapped into?
Well, I mean, I did go to A&E about 6 weeks before I went to the bridge, and, you know, I begged for help because I was really suicidal, and they said that they couldn't do anything because they didn't have any beds, and they sent me home with some Valium. And luckily for me, you know, I went home and my housemates, because I was at university at the time, my housemates were there, they supported me. But some people, they'll go back home after that and they have nothing and they'll take their own lives. So there needs to be so much more in place, and in place immediately. We can't wait for this.
So that's interesting, Sarah, what Johnny's saying there. Something needs to be done now. It's not something to look forward to in the future. I mean, what can be done now in terms of legislation?
Well, one of the things that we looked at in our inquiry was that where people go first to casualty, that using liaison psychiatry services, if they're put in place properly, does help to make a difference, and particularly where people are going in after self-harm. We know there's much more that we can do at that point, and so we've made recommendations about bringing forward the timescale for having very good liaison psychiatry services available in every department, but also it's about communication. We heard very powerfully from families who've been bereaved by suicide that we're not using every opportunity to involve families and close friends in actually helping to support people. So we've made recommendations about
and we did, and we did take a look at those recommendations, but I'm so sorry, Sarah, but that's all we have time for. But Sarah Wollaston and Johnny Benjamin, thank you both for coming in. Thank you. In Northern Ireland, the First Minister is facing a vote of no confidence over a heating scheme that would cost the taxpayer £400 million. Members of the Assembly walked out of the chamber today when Arlene Foster made a statement on the controversial scheme. A report by MPs is recommending increasing energy bills by £30 a year to stop electricity blackouts. They say the change is needed because the country's electricity reserve has fallen by 15% in 4 years. She was fabulously rich, a fan of diamonds and furs, and had a famous passion for divorce. Zsa Zsa Gabor rose to prominence as an actress, but it was her personality that made her a household name. Late in life, the socialite claimed she'd only had 8.5 husbands, as one of her 9 marriages was dissolved after just a few hours. Fittingly, it was her final partner, a toy boy 26 years her junior, who announced her death yesterday, aged 99. Sally Biddulph reports.
Zsa Zsa Gabor's life reads like a film script. Born in Budapest, a former Miss Hungary and a Hollywood actress. Yet her greatest role was as herself. Beautiful, glamorous and commanding attention everywhere.
I think it's an Anglo-Saxon sickness for a young man to ask a young woman how old she is. It's an insult.
As an actress, Zsa Zsa Gabor starred in more than 30 films. Her big break in the original Moulin Rouge.
Lie closer, my dear, and hear we pray.
And then there's this one she'd rather forget as the Queen of Outer Space.
Then we're the only men on the whole planet?
Yes.
Wow.
Away from the silver screen, she was the original celebrity, filling gossip columns globally as she notched up 9 husbands. Among them, hotel magnate Conrad Hilton, with whom she had her only child, a daughter called Francesca. She loved the publicity and joked about her multiple divorces.
Well, Bob Hope says every time I get divorced, I keep the house. So I'm a housewife.
And she was always one to flirt.
I am liking a good-looking man, yes, sir. You are very good-looking.
A brief brush with the law in 1989 further cemented her reputation for being feisty, spending 3 days in jail for slapping a traffic officer who had pulled her over. Never taking herself too seriously, that encounter led to a cameo in the Naked Gun films. For the last 30 years of her life, Zsa Zsa found lasting happiness with her 9th husband, Frederick Prince von Anhalt. Dogged by poor health in her 90s, her spirit remained sassy. The woman who said she never hated any man enough to give his diamonds back will be remembered as outrageous as she was glamorous.
Zsa Zsa Gabor, who has died aged 99. And finally, traditional royal greetings were cast aside as Prince Harry reunited with an orphan from Lesotho he first met on a gap year 12 years ago. Their affectionate hugs were captured on camera as part of a new ITV documentary, which followed the royal as he returned to the AIDS-stricken nation. Sally Lockwood reports.
Prince Harry's charity Centre Bali means forget-me-not, words he lives by as he seeks out an orphan he met on his first trip to Lesotho.
How are you? Look at you. How big you are now? How old are you now? 15? 15. Good man. I got your letter.
They've stayed in touch since they met 12 years ago. Prince Harry, just 20 years old, and Mutsu, a toddler. The pair planted a tree together.
Where's our tree? This one? Is it?
Yes.
It looks very different to when I was last here. Pear tree. Pear tree? It's great to see that he's so happy. Our tree has survived. It's grown up. The fence that we built is still there. He's in charge of the garden, along with a couple of the other boys. And at that age, he's got a serious responsibility in life. And that's great. Obviously, I would prefer it in a weird way for him not to have been there and for us not to know where he was, because then we know that he's happy with a family member, but sadly for him that's not the case.
Instead, he's being supported by Prince Harry's charity, accompanied to Lesotho by Tom Bradby in a new ITV documentary.
HIV, AIDS is the #1 killer of adolescents across sub-Saharan Africa.
Prince Harry is following in his mother's footsteps, helping children affected by HIV and AIDS. Humanitarian work has given him a similar passion and purpose.
This one. I found a way to try and use the name and the position for good. Okay.
He's done that for Mutso.
Are you excited to see this person here?
Both knowing firsthand what it's like growing up without a parent. Sally Lockwood, ITV News.
That's tonight from 9 on ITV. But that's it this lunchtime. James Mates and Mary Nightingale will be here with the ITV Evening News. But from everyone here, goodbye.